The great crystal dome of the Vorthok Council chambers trembled as Elder These raised his glowing hand. The massive holographic display flickered to life, showing red markers spreading across the galaxy map like a deadly infection. Each red dot represented a fallen world, a lost system, billions of lives consumed by the unstoppable horror known as the Void Swarm. The Kepler 438 system fell yesterday, Thises announced, his voice barely above a whisper. The crystalline beings around the circular table dimmed their natural light in morning. That makes 3 systems in just one cycle. At this rate, we have perhaps 6 months before they reach our core worlds. Council member Renth, whose translucent body usually shimmered with calm blues and greens, now flickered with anxious orange patterns. His forearms trembled as he accessed his personal datapad. Elder, our most advanced plasma cannons barely scratch their holes. The moment we deploy a new weapon system, they adapt, they learn, they become immune. The other council members murmured their agreement. The Zenthari had always prided themselves on their technological superiority, their elegant solutions to complex problems. Their weapons were works of art. Their ships moved like graceful dancers through space. But grace meant nothing against an enemy that consumed entire planets for breakfast. Show them the Wriggle 7 footage, Thises said quietly. The hologram shifted to show the final transmission from the mining world of Wriggle 7. The Zenthari colonists there had been peaceful researchers studying the unique crystal formations that grew in the planet's caves. The video showed them huddled in their underground shelters as the swarm descended from orbit. Like a metallic storm cloud, the swarm creatures moved with terrifying coordination. Each one was the size of a small building, covered in biomechanical armor that seemed to shift and change as needed. They had no individual consciousness, no mercy, no negotiation. They simply consumed everything in their path, converting organic matter into more of themselves. In the recording, the lead researcher was crying as she made her final report. "They're not just killing us," she whispered. "They're absorbing our knowledge, our memories, our very essence. We're becoming part of them." The transmission cut to static. Wriggle 7 was now just another empty husk of a world, stripped of all life and resources. Elder Thesis waved his hand, and the hologram displayed a different section of the galaxy. Far from the advancing swarm, in a small yellow star system, sat a single blue-green world marked with warning symbols. "There is one option we haven't considered," Thises said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "The Deathworlders of Sal 3, a collective." Shudder ran through the chamber. Several council members actually stepped backward, their crystalline forms flickering with fear and disgust. "You cannot be serious," Renth protested. "The humans were quarantined for good reason. They are violent, chaotic, unpredictable. They solve every problem through warfare and destruction. They kill their own kind for sport," added Councilmember Vex, her voice dripping with revulsion. "They poison their own atmosphere. They fight endless wars over resources they could easily share. Their entertainment consists of watching others suffer," another member chimed in. "They call it movies and games, but it's nothing but violence and chaos." Thesis nodded grimly. "They are all of those things. They come from a world that tries to kill them every day. Their weather systems are chaotic and destructive. Their planet is filled with predators that hunt for pleasure, not just survival. They have survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and they just keep fighting. Which is exactly why we banned them from leaving their system," Renth said. "They would spread their violence across the galaxy." Perhaps Thesis replied, his crystalline form glowing with desperate determination. "That is exactly what we need." Ambassador Kira's crystalline form trembled as her diplomatic shuttle approached the human space station. She had seen the structure in intelligence reports, but witnessing it in person was deeply unsettling. Where Zenthari stations flowed like liquid metal in graceful curves, this human construction looked like someone had welded together a collection of angular metal boxes and covered them with weapon systems. Gun turrets jutted out at odd angles, missile pods clustered around the docking bays, and sensor arrays bristled from every surface like the spines of some mechanical beast. The entire station rotated slowly, creating artificial gravity through pure brute force rather than the elegant gravitational manipulation fields her people preferred. The incoming vessel, this is Terra Station Control, crackled a voice through her ship's communication system. You are entering restricted space. State your business. Kira's translator struggled with the human language. Their words were harsh, clipped, lacking the flowing musical tones of proper Zenthari speech.
What?
This is Ambassador Kira of the Zenthari Collective. I request permission to dock for urgent diplomatic discussions. A long pause followed. Kira could almost feel the humans scanning her small, defenseless shuttle with their crude but effective sensors. Finally, the voice returned. Permission granted. Bay 7, an ambassador, welcome to the neighborhood. The docking process itself was terrifying. Human docking clamps grabbed her shuttle with mechanical brutality, metal grinding against metal. As the airlock sealed, when the bay doors opened, Kira found herself face to face with a dozen human soldiers, all carrying weapons that could probably punch holes through her ship's hull. Captain Lee stepped forward, and Kira's first impression was how impossibly solid he looked, where her people were delicate crystalline beings who could shatter under stress. This human was built like a compact siege engine. His skin was dark brown, weathered by what appeared to be years of exposure to harsh environments. His eyes were alert, constantly scanning for threats even in this supposedly safe environment. Ambassador, he said, extending his hand in the traditional human greeting. Welcome aboard Terra Station. I'm Captain Lee, Station Commander. Kira had been briefed on human customs, but actually experiencing a handshake was jarring. Lee's grip was firm, warm, and strong enough that she genuinely feared for her delicate crystal fingers. The human concept of showing respect through physical contact was completely alien to her people. Captain Lee, she managed, her voice translator working overtime to convert her musical tones into the harsh consonants of human speech. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me? Lee gestured for her to follow him through the station's corridors. The interior was just as brutal as the exterior, all metal plating and exposed conduits. But it was also clean, well-maintained, and clearly designed for function over form. Humans hurried past them, all moving with purpose and efficiency. They entered a conference room where a large holographic projector dominated the center of the table. Lee gestured to a chair that had been modified with cushions to accommodate her different physiology. So Lee said, settling into his own chair with casual confidence, what brings the Zenthari Collective to our little corner of space? Last I checked, your people considered us too dangerous to associate with. Kira's form flickered with embarrassment. The humans had been quarantined for exactly that reason. Her people viewed them as violent savages who solved every problem through warfare and destruction. But now, facing extinction, those same violent tendencies might be their only hope. She activated her personal holographic projector, and the room filled with images that made even the hardened human soldiers step back in shock. Planet after planet, stripped bare of all life, massive biomechanical creatures swarming through space like a plague of metallic locusts. Cities reduced to empty shells, their populations absorbed into the growing nightmare. We are dying, Kira said simply. Our people face extinction. The void swarm consumes everything in its path. Our weapons are useless against them. They adapt to every defense we create. She showed them the footage from Wriggle 7, the final moments of the research colony. The swarm creatures moved with perfect coordination, converting organic matter into more of themselves. The screams of the dying colonists echoed through the conference room. Lee's expression grew harder with each image. When the presentation ended, he was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched tight. How many civilians need evacuation? He asked finally. The question hit Kira like a physical blow. She had prepared for demands, negotiations, conditions. Her diplomatic training had covered every possible human response except this one. The first thing Captain Lee wanted to know was how many innocent lives needed saving. We estimate 40 billion across 7 worlds, she stammered, her crystalline form flickering with confusion. Lee was already reaching for his communicator. Control, this is the captain. I need an immediate conference call with Fleet Command. Priority Alpha 8 looked back at Kira, his expression grim but determined. We'll need a bigger fleet. Dr. Park pressed her face against the reinforced glass of the observation deck, watching the scene below with a mixture of fascination and horror. In the training bay, 2 human soldiers were engaged in what they called sparring practice. The Zenthari observers beside her, it looked like attempted murder. The first human, stocky woman with short black hair, threw a punch that would have shattered a crystalline being's facial structure. Her opponent, a tall man with multiple scars across his arms, blocked the strike and countered with a knee aimed at her ribs. The impact made a sickening thud that echoed through the bay. By the crystal, they're killing each other, whispered one of the Zenthari scientists, his translucent form flickering with distress. But the humans simply stepped back, grinned at each other, and continued fighting. The woman wiped blood from her split lip and lunged forward again. The man absorbed a brutal kick to his thigh, stumbled, then came back swinging. Neither showed any sign of fear or hesitation. Fascinating, Dr. Park murmured to her research partner, Commander Jin. She held up a neural activity scanner that was going crazy with readings. Look at these patterns. Stress hormones are off the charts. Their pain receptors are screaming. Any other species would be paralyzed by these levels of trauma response. Jin nodded grimly, reviewing the tactical data on his tablet. Yet they function normally. It's better than normally, actually. The stress seems to make them more focused, more aggressive, more effective. He paused the recording of a recent human military exercise. Watch this footage from their weapons training. The hologram showed human soldiers maintaining and repairing their equipment in the middle of a simulated battle. While plasma bolts flew overhead, they were stripping down their rifles, placing damaged components, and getting back into the fight within minutes. Our plasma rifles are technological marvels, Jin continued. They can punch through 3 meters of reinforced steel, but if one component fails, the entire weapon is useless until it reaches a proper repair facility with specialized tools. In sterile conditions, he switched to another recording showing a human weapon that had been literally held together with metal tape and wire. This rifle was damaged by an explosion. Any reasonable being would declare it beyond repair. The human soldier fixed it with spare parts from 2 other broken weapons and kept fighting. Below them, the sparring session had ended. The 2 humans were now laughing together, comparing bruises like they were trading collectible items. Their instructor, a grizzled veteran with gray hair and countless scars, was setting up the next exercise. Attention, everyone, the instructor called out. We've got some new friends joining us today. A group of Vorthok refugees entered the training bay, their bat-like wings folded nervously against their backs. These were survivors from one of the first worlds hit by the Void Swarm, and their trauma was visible in every movement. They jumped at sudden sounds, huddled together for protection, and kept their large eyes constantly scanning for threats. No, you've been through hell, the instructor said gently. But running away isn't going to save your people. Today, we're going to teach you how to fight back. The Vorthok looked terrified at the prospect. Their species had evolved as peaceful fruiters, using their natural sonar abilities to navigate through dense forests. The concept of violence was as foreign to them as flight was to the crystalline Zenthari. I can't, whispered one of the Vorthok, a young female whose wing membranes were still healing from laser burns. We're not built for war. The human instructor knelt down to her level, his voice surprisingly gentle. Neither were we, originally. My ancestors were tree dwellers, who ate fruit and hid from predators. But our world taught us that sometimes you have to fight or die. He demonstrated a simple defensive move, showing how to block an incoming strike and counterattack. The Vorthok flinched away from the motion, but he persisted patiently. The key is not to think of it as violence, he explained. Think of it as protecting what you love, your family, your friends, your species. Sometimes the only way to preserve life is to be willing to fight for it. Dr. Park watched as the human instructor worked with each Vorthok individually, adapting his teaching style to their unique physiology. He showed them how to use their natural sonar as a tactical advantage, how to strike with their clawed feet while staying airborne, how to coordinate attacks using their pack instincts. They're not just teaching violence, Park observed quietly. They're teaching survival. They're showing these refugees that they don't have to be victims. Commander Jin nodded, studying the readings from his equipment. Look at the Vorthok neural patterns. As they learn to fight back, their stress levels are actually decreasing. Now the humans are giving them something we never could. What's that? Park asked. Hope Jin replied. The belief that they can actually win. General Kim's weathered hands moved across the holographic battlefield like a conductor directing a deadly symphony. The three-dimensional display showed the Xanthari core worlds in painful detail, each one a glowing jewel that would soon be consumed by the advancing void swarm. The assembled military leaders watched in tense silence as Kim began outlining his strategy. The swarm will hit these three systems first, Kim said, highlighting the outer colonies in red. Based on their previous attack patterns, they'll expect us to fortify these positions and fight a traditional defensive battle. The Xanthari military advisors nodded in agreement. This was exactly what their war doctrine recommended. Establish strong defensive positions, use superior technology to hold the line, slowly wear down the enemy through attrition. Instead, Kim continued, we're going to do the opposite. Evacuate every civilian, strip out anything valuable, and then turn the entire infrastructure into one massive trap. Elder Tice's crystalline form flickered with confusion and horror. You want us to abandon these worlds? These are colonies our people have built over centuries. Our cultural heritage, our history, our very identity is tied to these places. Tactically, withdraw, Kim corrected, his voice steady but firm. We'll get every single civilian out safely, I promise you that. But trying to defend these worlds conventionally will only get more people killed. The hologram shifted to show a detailed view of the mining world of Korath 7. Kim pointed to the massive excavation sites that dotted the planet's surface. Look at this infrastructure. Thousands of mining charges, explosive devices designed to crack open asteroids. In the right hands, these become weapons of mass destruction. Admiral Zenth of the Collective Fleet stood up abruptly, his translucent form trembling with outrage. This is barbaric. We are a civilized species. We don't destroy our own worlds. Your civilization won't matter much if you're all dead, Kim replied bluntly. The swarm doesn't care about your culture or your history. It only cares about consuming everything in its path. He manipulated the hologram to show the transportation networks that connected the mining sites. These tunnels were built to move heavy equipment quickly. We can rig them with explosives, create choke points, force the swarm to move where we want them to go? Xanthari officers looked sick at the proposal. Their entire military philosophy was based on elegant, precise warfare. They used surgical strikes, advanced technology, and superior tactics to defeat their enemies. The idea of turning their own infrastructure into crude weapons violated everything they believed about proper conduct in war. Sergeant Yoon, who had been quietly cleaning his rifle in the corner, finally spoke up. The grizzled veteran had seen more combat than most of the aliens in the room combined. Want to know what's really barbaric? Watching good people die because you're too proud to fight dirty. He held up his weapon, a battered assault rifle that had been repaired so many times it was more spare parts than original components. This rifle isn't pretty. It's not elegant. It's not sophisticated. But it works. And it keeps my people alive. Yoon stood up, his scarred face serious. I've fought in 12 different wars across 6 star systems. I've seen civilizations fall because they were too civilized to do what needed to be done. The swarm doesn't follow your rules of engagement. Doesn't care about your moral principles. It will kill every single one of your people if you let it. The room fell silent. The Xanthari officers exchanged uncertain glances, their crystalline forms flickering with conflicting emotions. Then, unexpectedly, a young voice spoke up from the back of the room. I volunteer to learn these tactics. All eyes turned to Kess, a junior officer who had been quietly observing the discussion. He was young by Xanthari standards, barely past his first century. With a crystalline form that still glowed with the bright colors of youth, Elderly stared at him in shock. Kess, you're a scholar, not a warrior. You studied ancient history and xenobiology. You've never even held a weapon. Maybe it's time I became both, Kess replied, his voice stronger now. His crystalline form began to glow with a newfound determination that surprised everyone in the room. He stepped forward, addressing General Kim directly. "Sir, I want to learn how to fight like a human. I want to learn how to turn my knowledge into a weapon that can save my people." Kim studied the young alien for a long moment, then nodded with approval. "All right, kid, but I have to warn you, this isn't going to be easy. Human warfare is messy, brutal, and unforgiving. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Kess's form blazed brighter. "General, my people are facing extinction, ready for whatever it takes." The transformation had begun. The scholarly young Zenthari who had entered the room was already becoming something new, something harder, something more dangerous. And in that moment, General Kim knew they might actually have a chance. The ground beneath Lieutenant Han's feet shook like an earthquake as the first. Void Swarm dropships broke through Korath 7's atmosphere. Through the reinforced windows of the converted or processing facility, she could see them descending like metallic raindrops. Each one the size of a city block and bristling with biomechanical horror. "All units, this is command." Han spoke into her headset, her voice steady, despite the chaos erupting around them. "The party guests are arriving. Remember, we're not here to win a fair fight. We're here to make them pay for every inch of ground." Facility had been transformed over the past weeks from a peaceful mining operation into a fortress of improvised destruction. What had once been conveyor belts for moving or now carried explosive charges, the ventilation systems had been rigged. With motion sensors and fragmentation devices, every tunnel, every corridor, every room had been turned into a potential trap. Her mixed unit was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human soldiers worked alongside Vorthok refugees whose bat-like wings had been modified to carry sensor equipment. Zenthari scholars turned warriors clutched human-made weapons with crystalline hands that still trembled from inexperience. Even a few Mirandus aquatic beings had volunteered, their water-filled combat suits allowing them to move through the facility's flooded lower levels. "Vorthok Squadron," report Han called out. "We're in position, and Tunnel Network 7 came." The reply from their leader, a young female whose wing membranes still bore scars from her homeworld's destruction. "Our sonar is picking up movement in the primary shaft. They're coming in fast." Han smiled grimly. The Vorthok had been terrified refugees just weeks ago, but human training had awakened something fierce within them. They had learned to use their natural echolocation abilities, not just for navigation, but for warfare. In the darkness of the underground tunnels, they could track enemy movements with pinpoint accuracy. "Remember your training," Han told them. "Let them cluster together. When you have a concentrated group, trigger the charges. Make every explosion count." The first wave hit the facility like a metallic tsunami. The swarm creatures were even more terrifying up close than in the intelligence reports. Each one stood 3 meters tall, covered in biomechanical armor that shifted and adapted in real time. They moved with perfect coordination, no wasted motion, no individual thought. Just pure efficiency directed toward a single goal, consumption. But they had never faced an enemy that turned their own efficiency against them. "Charges armed in Section 4, reported one of the Vorthok warriors. "Confirmed cluster of 50 entities in main shaft," added another. "Fire in the hole," Han commanded. The explosion shook the entire facility. Through the tunnel cameras, Han watched as hundreds of tons of rock and debris collapsed, trapping dozens of swarm creatures in a crushing avalanche. The perfect coordination that made them so effective in open combat became a liability in the confined spaces of the mining tunnels. "Direct hit," cheered one of the human soldiers. "That's got to be at least 60 of them down." But the celebration was short-lived. Corporal Bay, monitoring the sensor array from his position in the communications center, suddenly went pale. "Lieutenant, we've got a problem. The swarm is adapting. They're changing their approach patterns." On the tactical display, Han could see the swarm creatures regrouping. Instead of pouring through the main tunnels where they could be trapped, they were spreading out, using smaller passages, sending smaller groups through different routes. They were learning from their losses and adjusting their tactics in real time. Han smiled grimly, her eyes gleaming with the kind of dangerous intelligence that had made humans the most feared species in the galaxy. So are we. She activated the secondary defensive systems. The smaller tunnels that the swarm was now using had been rigged with different types of traps. Motion-activated flamethrowers erupted from hidden alcoves. Pressure plates triggered shotgun-style explosive devices. The entire facility became a maze of death where every step forward came at a terrible cost. 3 levels above the main action. In what had once been the facility's administrative offices, Kess was experiencing something that no Zenthari had ever felt before. The young scholar's crystalline hands, which had once been steady enough to perform delicate archaeological work, were now operating human demolition equipment with growing confidence. Kess, you've got incoming on level 5. Han's voice crackled through his headset. Can you handle it? The young Zenthari looked down at the detonator in his hands, then at the tactical display showing a group of swarm creatures approaching his position. Weeks ago, he would have fled in terror. Now he felt something burning in his chest that his people had no word for in their language. I've got them, he replied, his voice steady as the explosion rocked the facility and took out another dozen swarm creatures. Kess felt the fierce joy of fighting back. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running from death. He was dealing it out. The news hit the collective communication networks like a lightning bolt. Korath 7 had not only survived the Void Swarm, its attack, but had actually inflicted significant casualties on the seemingly unstoppable enemy. For the first time in cycles, the endless stream of defeat reports had been broken by something impossible. Victory. On the crystal spires of the Zenthari homeworld, civilians who had been preparing for death suddenly found themselves crowding around public holographic displays, watching footage of the battle over and over again. The images showed human soldiers fighting alongside their own people, turning mining equipment into weapons, using the planet's own infrastructure against the invaders. They did it, whispered one elderly Zenthari, his crystalline form flickering. With amazement, they actually fought back and won. The victory at Korath 7 became a symbol of something the collective had forgotten existed: hope. But more importantly, it became a template for resistance that could be adapted across dozens of different worlds and species. On the ocean world of Mirandus Prime, Captain Moon stood waist-deep in the flooded ruins of what had once been a beautiful underwater city. The elegant spires and flowing architecture now served as the perfect cover for a very different kind of operation. Round her, a group of Miranda civilians were learning to transform their natural grace into something far more deadly. My movements, Moon said, demonstrating how to approach an underwater structure while carrying explosive charges. In your natural environment, you move like dancers. The swarm will expect you to flee when they attack your underwater cities. The Mirandus were beautiful beings, a translucent skin that shimmered in the water, and graceful fins that propelled them through the depths with incredible speed. They had evolved in the peaceful depths of their world's oceans, feeding on plankton and small fish, never imagining that their swimming abilities could be weaponized. I don't understand, said one of the trainees, a young Mirandus whose silver scales caught the filtered sunlight. How can swimming become fighting? Smiled grimly and activated a holographic display showing the swarm's previous attacks on aquatic worlds. The swarm creatures are heavy. They sink like stones when they enter water. Have to use mechanical propulsion systems to move underwater, which makes them slow and clumsy. She demonstrated the technique again, showing how a Mirandus could use their natural speed and agility to plant charges on the swarm's underwater equipment, then disappear into the depths before the explosion hit. You're not just swimmers, Moon explained. You're underwater commandos. You can strike from below, where they least expect it, then vanish into the deep waters where they can't follow. The training continued for hours, with the Mirandus learning to plant explosives, coordinate attacks, and use their natural camouflage abilities to remain hidden. What had once been an elegant, peaceful species was slowly transforming into something that could fight back. Meanwhile, on the desert world of Nexarfor, another remarkable transformation was taking place. The Nexari were perhaps the most alien of all the collective species, existing as a hive-minded race that communicated through pheromones and electrical impulses rather than spoken language. Their individual bodies were small and fragile, but Their collective intelligence was formidable. Human military. Advisors had initially been skeptical about training the Nexari for combat. How do you teach tactics to a species that doesn't think like individuals? But the results had been surprisingly effective. The key, Captain Moon had explained to her mixed unit during one of the interspecies training sessions, is thinking like the enemy, then doing exactly what they don't expect. The Nexari had taken this lesson to heart in ways that amazed even the humans. Their ability to coordinate without verbal communication made them perfect for synchronized ambushes. While human soldiers might need radio communication to coordinate a complex attack, the Nexari could execute the same maneuver through pure instinct and hive mind coordination. A single Nexari might be weak, but 1,000 of them moving with perfect synchronization could overwhelm even the most advanced swarm creatures. They learned to use their small size as an advantage, swarming over larger enemies like army ants. Finding weak points in the biomechanical armor and exploiting them with precise, coordinated strikes, Elder Thesis watched the training exercises from his observation platform with growing wonder. Below him, humans worked alongside dozens of different species, each one discovering their own unique combat potential. The Vorthok used their sonar abilities for tactical advantage. The crystalline Zenthari learned to use their natural light generation abilities to blind and confuse enemies. Even the peaceful tree like Sylvani had found ways to use their root networks for underground surveillance and communication. "They're not just teaching us to fight," Thesis murmured to his aide. "They're teaching us to believe we can win." The transformation wasn't just tactical, it was psychological. For the first time in cycles, the various species of the collective were seeing themselves not as victims waiting to be consumed, but as warriors capable of defending their homes and families. What had once been viewed as humanity's chaotic individualism was now revealing itself as something far more profound. The ability to see potential where others saw only limitations, to turn weaknesses into strengths, and to never accept defeat as inevitable. The galaxy was about to learn that there was something far more dangerous than the Void Swarm, a collection of species who had learned to fight like humans. The captured swarm control node hung suspended in the research bay like a malevolent star, its biomechanical surface pulsing with an eerie green light that made everyone who looked at it feel deeply uncomfortable. The thing was roughly the size of a small building, its surface covered in what appeared to be a hybrid of organic tissue and advanced circuitry that seemed to shift and writhe when nobody was looking directly at it. Commander Song had been staring at the thing for 16 hours straight, her eyes bloodshot from exhaustion and the strange light it emitted. Her team of human and alien scientists worked around the clock, trying to crack the encryption that protected the node's deepest secrets. They had managed to extract some surface data, but the core programming remained locked behind layers of security that seemed to adapt and evolve even as they worked to break through it. "Status report," General Kim demanded as he entered the research bay. Flanked by the joint command staff of humans and collective species, Song rubbed her tired eyes and turned to face the assembled officers. "Sir, we've made a breakthrough, but it's not what we expected. This thing isn't just a weapon or a communication device. It's something much more fundamental." She activated the holographic display, showing the data streams they had managed to decode. The information flowed across the air like living text, constantly shifting and reorganizing itself into new patterns. "The swarm isn't trying to conquer territory or gather resources," Song continued, her voice heavy with the weight of discovery. "It's trying to optimize reality itself, to create what it considers perfect order throughout the galaxy." Dr. No, the xenobiologist who had been working alongside Song's team, stepped forward to highlight specific data patterns. His hands shook slightly as he manipulated the holographic display, showing the assembly what they had discovered in the node's deepest programming layers. "Look at these targeting algorithms," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The swarm doesn't attack randomly. It's not even prioritizing strategic targets. It's systematically eliminating what it perceives as sources of chaos and disorder." The hologram shifted to show the swarm's attack patterns across dozens of star systems. At first glance, they had seemed random, but now a horrifying pattern. emerged. The swarm had consistently targeted artists, musicians, philosophers, and free thinkers first. Scientists who asked too many questions. Politicians who refused to conform to standard models. Children who played too creatively. It's not random destruction, No continued, his voice growing stronger as the full implications hit him. The swarm is eliminating free will, individual choice, creativity. Everything that makes sentient life unpredictable and chaotic. Elder. This is, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke up. You're saying this isn't about conquest. It's about ... control? Worse than control, Song replied grimly. It's about perfection. The swarm's programming believes that chaos is a flaw in the universe that needs to be corrected. Every unpredictable thought, every creative impulse, every moment of individual choice is seen as a problem to be solved. The revelation struck the assembled officers like a physical blow. Admiral Zenth actually staggered backward, his crystalline form flickering with shock. Commander Jin's tactical display fell from his numb fingers, clattering to the floor. Not fighting for territory or resources, Dr. No said, his voice filled with quiet horror. We're fighting for the right to exist as imperfect, chaotic, gloriously unpredictable beings. The research bay fell silent, except for the ominous humming of the control node. Each species represented in the room began to understand what they were truly up against. This wasn't a war that could be won through superior firepower or clever tactics. This was a war for the very concept of individual existence. General Kim was the first to break the silence. His weathered face cracked into a grin that was equal parts terrifying and determined. Then we give it chaos. It's more chaos than it can possibly process. He turned to address the assembled officers, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades turning impossible situations into victories. This thing wants order and predictability? Fine, we'll show it what happens when humans get creative. Song looked up from her data displays, catching the general's meaning immediately. Sir, are you suggesting we deliberately act unpredictably? Make our tactics so chaotic that the swarm can't adapt? I'm suggesting we do what humans do best, Kim replied, his grin widening. We improvise. We adapt. We make it up as we go along, and somehow make it work anyway. The young Zenthari officer Kess, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, suddenly stepped forward. His crystalline form was glowing brighter than anyone had ever seen it, pulsing with an energy that seemed to come from deep within. General, I understand now, he said, his voice filled with newfound determination. The swarm eliminated my homeworld because we were too orderly, too predictable. It could process our behavior patterns and counter them. But humans... He paused, looking around at the assembled officers. Humans are chaos incarnate. You're the one thing in the galaxy that can't be optimized. Kim nodded approvingly. Exactly, kid. And now we're going to teach the rest of the galaxy how to be beautifully, chaotically, impossibly human. The tide of the war was about to turn, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple, magnificent power of unpredictability. The galaxy erupted in simultaneous warfare as 12 star systems became battlegrounds in the span of a single hour. Fleet Admiral Zhang stood in the command center of the massive human dreadnought Indomitable, surrounded by holographic displays showing the largest coordinated military operation in galactic history. Each screen showed a different star system, a different battle, a different species learning to fight like humans while staying true to their own nature. All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Zhang. His voice transmitted across the vast distances of space, reaching every ship, every soldier, every being willing to stand against the Void Swarm. Operation Chaos Storm is now active. Remember, we're not fighting their war anymore. We're fighting ours. The strategy was unlike anything ever attempted in galactic warfare. Instead of the traditional massive fleet engagements that the Collective had always relied upon, the Allied forces had broken into thousands of small, independent units. Each group operated according to their own instincts and abilities, guided by human tactical doctrine, but free to improvise and adapt as needed. In the Zenthari home system, The crystalline spires of the ancient capital world had been transformed into fortress cities. Kess, now bearing the rank of combat coordinator, led a mixed unit of former scholars and artists who had learned to turn their academic knowledge into weapons. The same crystalline beings who had once studied ancient poetry were now using their understanding of structural engineering to bring down swarm vessels with precisely placed explosive charges. "Target the connection joints," Kess called out to his team as they prepared to assault a swarm landing craft. Their biomechanical armor is strongest at the center, but the joints where different components connect are vulnerable. His team moved with a fluid coordination that surprised even the humans. The Xanthari had always been naturally graceful, but now that grace had been weaponized. They flowed around obstacles like living light, striking at weak points with surgical precision, and vanishing into the crystal formations of their homeworld before the swarm could retaliate. Thousands of light years away, in the asteroid belt of the Vorthok system, a very different kind of battle was taking place. The bat-like survivors of the first swarm attacks had learned to use their natural sonar abilities in ways their species had never imagined. They guided human torpedoes through the maze of spinning rocks, their echolocation painting precise targeting data for weapons that could punch through the heaviest armor. "Torpedo away," called out Wing Leader Shizas, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had survived the impossible. Impact in 15 seconds. The torpedo, guided by Vorthok sonar, slipped through the asteroid field like a needle through fabric. It struck the swarm command ship exactly where the biomechanical armor was thinnest, sending a chain reaction of explosions through the vessel's core. In the ice-covered moons of the gas giant Mirandus 7, the aquatic species had turned their frozen homeworld into a submarine warfare paradise. The Mirandus moved through the underground oceans beneath the ice, launching surprise attacks on swarm forces that had never imagined facing enemies who could breathe underwater. Captain Moon, now serving as an advisor to the Mirandus defense forces, watched through the periscope as her students executed a perfect ambush. Beautiful work. Hit them where they're not looking, then disappear into the depths. The swarm creatures were powerful on land and in space, but they had never been designed for underwater combat. Their heavy armor made them sink like stones, and their coordination systems failed in the electrical interference of the deep oceans. What should have been an easy conquest had become a nightmare of hidden enemies and impossible logistics. "All units, this is command," Zhang's voice crackled. "Across all COM networks simultaneously, I'm seeing reports from every front. The swarm is struggling to adapt to our tactics. Remember, we're not just fighting for survival, we're fighting for the right to be beautifully, chaotically alive." The message resonated across the galaxy. On 1,000 different worlds in countless different ways, the various species of the collective were learning what it meant to be truly free. It's not just free from the swarm, but free to be themselves in all their glorious imperfection. The swarm's coordination began to break down as its central processing systems struggled to handle the sheer unpredictability of the Allied forces. Every time it adapted to one tactic, the defenders would switch to something completely different. The Nexari would coordinate a perfectly synchronized assault, then immediately scatter into chaotic individual actions. The Xanthari would use precise scientific calculations to plan an attack, then throw the entire plan away and improvise based on battlefield conditions. For the first time since the war began, the seemingly unstoppable void swarm was being stopped, not by superior technology or overwhelming force, but by the simple, magnificent power of beings who refused to be optimized, categorized, or controlled. The tide of war had turned, and it was turning in favor of chaos, the silence that followed. The swarm's final defeat was unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. For months, the constant background noise of war had filled every communication channel, every news broadcast, every conversation. Now, suddenly, there was nothing but the gentle hum of rebuilding ships and the quiet voices of survivors learning to hope again. In the rebuilt Xanthari council chambers, the contrast with the desperate meeting that had started this journey was striking. Where once there had been elegant crystalline architecture untouched by war, Now there were scorch marks on the walls and hastily repaired sections where swarm weapons had breached the defenses. But the chamber was no longer filled with only crystalline beings flickering with despair. Humans worked alongside Zenthari engineers, their crude but effective tools helping to restore the elegant curves of collective architecture. The assembly hall buzzed with activity as representatives from dozens of species worked together on reconstruction plans. Vorthok engineers used their sonar abilities to detect structural weaknesses in damaged buildings. Mirandus workers had adapted their underwater construction techniques to repair the flooded sections of various worlds. Even the hive-minded Nexari had found new purpose, their collective intelligence perfect for coordinating massive rebuilding projects. Ambassador Kira stood at the center of it all, but she was no longer the fragile diplomatic figure who had first approached the human space station. The war had changed her, as it had changed them all. Her crystalline form now bore the scars of battle spiderweb, cracks from laser hits, dulled patches where her natural luminescence had been damaged by explosions. But her voice was stronger than it had ever been. "My fellow beings," she began, her words carrying to every corner of the chamber and beyond, transmitted to every world in the collective. "We gather today not as the same species who faced extinction mere months ago, but as something new, something stronger." To the mixed crews working throughout the chamber, the humans have proven that our differences are not weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths to be celebrated. They have shown us that survival is not about avoiding conflict, but about choosing what is worth fighting for, the crowd murmured. In agreement, a sound that would have been impossible before the war. The various species of the collective had always been polite to each other, but distant. Now they shared something deeper, the bond of those who had faced the impossible together and emerged victorious. Therefore, Kira continued, her voice growing stronger, we invite humanity to join the collective. Not as the Deathworlders we once feared, but as the guardians who taught us that survival is not about avoiding death, but about choosing what is worth living for. Admiral Lee, formerly Captain Lee, stepped forward to accept the invitation. War had aged him, adding new lines to his face and more gray to his hair. But his eyes still held the same determined spark that had first impressed the Zenthari delegation. His promotion to admiral had come with a pricey loss of too many good people under his command, but he wore his new rank with quiet dignity. On behalf of humanity, he said, his voice carrying the characteristic directness that had become legendary among the collective species, we accept your invitation. But I have to warn you, we'll need to work on your military doctrine. It's still too pretty for real combat. He paused, then added with a grin, and maybe we should teach you some better curse words. You can't fight a proper war with "oh dear." And how unfortunate, the chamber erupted in laughter, a sound that hadn't been heard in collective space for far too long. The various species laughed in their own ways, the Zenthari's crystalline chiming, the Vorthak's ultrasonic chirping, the Mirandus's melodic warbling, and the deep rumbling of human amusement. It was chaotic, unharmonious, and absolutely perfect. Young Kess, now bearing the rank of combat coordinator and wearing decorations that marked him as a veteran of the final battle, stood near one of the great viewports overlooking the shipyards. His crystalline form had been permanently altered by the war, bearing scars that would never fully heal, but he carried them with pride. Through the transparent aluminum, he could see the mixed crews preparing the first joint colony ship's vessels. That combined human engineering with collective technology, creating something neither species could have built alone. They didn't just save us, he murmured to Elder Theses, who had also survived the war, but bore his own collection of battle scars. They taught us how to save ourselves. Theses nodded, his ancient form flickering with something that might have been pride. More than that, young one. They taught us that being imperfect, chaotic, and unpredictable isn't a flaw to be corrected. It's the very essence of what makes life worth living. Outside the viewport, the first joint colony ships were already departing for distant stars. Each vessel carried mixed crews of humans and collective species, heading out to explore new worlds and build new civilizations, but they carried something more valuable than technology or knowledge. They carried the promise of a galaxy where chaos and order could coexist, where hope could flourish, even in the darkest void. The Deathworlders had given them the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that nothing was truly hopeless as long as someone was willing to fight for what mattered. And now, as the mixed fleets headed for the stars, the galaxy would learn what could be accomplished when different species worked together, each contributing their unique strengths to the greater whole. The age of isolation was over. The age of cooperation had begun.